Hello, and welcome to the chapter on materials. In this chapter, we'll cover the basics of materials in Blender and the standard internal renderer. We'll deal with cycles in another chapter. Many people use the terms material and texture interchangeably, but that's not correct. A texture is color information about an object. A material covers much more than that. Think of a material as the box that you put a texture and many other attributes into. A material will also contain information about the specularity or shininess, whether the object is opaque or translucent, and much more. One of the simplest characteristics to add to a material is color. So let's start there. I've deleted the default cube and added a UV sphere to my scene. To add a material, I will select the sphere and I'll go to the Materials tab in the Properties window. When we first open it up, there's not much there. That's because we haven't created any materials of our own yet, and Blender has no standard library of materials natively. However, if we click on the pull-down next to New, we'll see that Blender has created a default material and assigned it. Let's choose that. In the first window, you'll see our material has been assigned an automatic name of, well, material. If we were to add more materials, they would follow a simple pattern of material 001, 002, 003, etc. Now, materials are reusable with any object in Blender, so it's important to name them with a naming convention that's going to make some kind of sense to you. Let's double-click on it in the window and name this one Bright Red. The name also changes immediately below, and our pull-down now shows Bright Red as a material for any other object in our scene. Alright, now it's time to actually make our material a bright red. If we scroll past the preview window to the diffuse setting, we can click on the white diffuse color block, and that will bring up our color selector. The color selector has four ways to choose color. We have RGB, or red, green, and blue, HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value, and hexadecimal, which allows us to enter a corresponding number code for the color we want. Lastly, we have a color picker that we can sample anything in our scene with if we want to color match. We'll use the RGB controls and select a bright red. We can select these in the color window or by adjusting the sliders beneath. I'll simply use the color window. Now, by default, our material is linked to our object's mesh data block. But what does that mean? Well, if we open our sphere object in our outliner panel above, we'll see that we have a sphere mesh and a bright red material. Any other mesh that shares this data block, such as a linked duplicate, will also share this material. Now, we don't have to have it that way. It is possible to connect our material to the object itself rather than the data block. I'll click the X to the right of the material name, which will remove its link to the data block. I can then select Object rather than Data from the linking drop-down box that's next to that. Now I can click on the Material ID button and select our bright red material from the drop-down. If we return to our outliner, we can see that our material is now attached to the object itself rather than the mesh data block. Alright, let's take a look at the preview panel before we close out. By default, the preview uses the second object, a sphere. You do, however, have a choice of several other objects that may serve you better depending on the object you're working on in your scene. You can choose to view your material as a plane, the default sphere, a cube, monkey, Blender's hair, or a sphere with a sky background. Useful if you're doing something highly reflective. Alright, let's go ahead and review. We've learned where the Material Property tab is, and how to rename our default material. We've also learned that by default a material will attach itself to an object's mesh data block, and that we can attach a material directly to the main object if we so choose. We've also discussed the importance of naming our materials and had an introduction to the diffuse color block, which lets us choose a basic color for our material several different ways. Alright, I think that'll do as a brief introduction. Next, let's look at multiple materials. I'll see you there.